My name's Krishna. Thank you so much for joining me here. If you want to, you can come closer. I won't bite, and I have had a shower today. All right, so this afternoon session is about how you can use social selling. So we're going to start off in terms of looking at some trends that are going on in terms of the use of social media. We're also going to look at some things that you need to be aware of on different platforms. Actually, I do want to spend quite a bit of time with you talking about content, about what's relevant content that you want to share. So as you're in the sector you're in, obviously I need to start off with a disclaimer in terms of saying make sure that whatever you share online actually complies with the requirements in terms of financial services, what you can and you can't say. So if you're worried about that, obviously check out the guidelines, but also particularly what you might do is not sell online, but actually what you might do is educate people online. If you also go and look at some organizations, say some of the banks who are very active in terms of on social, let's take, for example, on Twitter, when they are talking about a particular product, what they'll also do from a disclosure perspective, they'll put a hashtag, let's say on Twitter, hashtag ad. So they're saying we're talking about our products here. So they're actually being very upfront, and so therefore they're falling within the regulations there. Okay, so let's just think about how you attract clients. When I first moved to Ireland in 2000, I don't know if many of you have moved countries or moved towns, but one of the things you need to obviously look at is, the infrastructure around you. Now, at that stage, I didn't have any kids, so I didn't have to worry about schooling. But I did have to worry about, for example, my teeth. I needed to find a dentist. So yes, of course, you could, online was a bit more limited then. But what did I do in terms of when I needed to find a dentist? So I've moved to a new country for me. I've moved into a house where somebody next door to me happened to have great teeth. Now, I forgot that actually I'm an applied biologist. I did a degree in applied biology. So I forgot all my genetics that actually that also influences your teeth. But I thought, well, because he's got good teeth, he probably looks after them, probably therefore there's a chance he might know a dentist. So I asked him, because I didn't really know many people in Ireland at that point in time, so I asked my next door neighbour. He had better teeth than his wife, so I asked him. And so that's how I found my dentist. I wear contact lenses and I wear glasses as well. And so when I got to my dentist, I then noticed that my dentist wore glasses. So I thought, well, if they're a dentist and they're wearing glasses, chances are they probably go to an optician pretty regularly, otherwise they couldn't see what they're doing. They must know a reasonable optician. So I asked my dentist who they recommend as an optician. And so 16 years on, I'm still using that same dentist and that same optician. And for many of us, we get business through referrals, don't we? Get business from people who we know to do business with. So you might say, well, where does online come into that? I want you to think about in terms of online being that same in terms of that offline network, but online. Be those that contacts and connections that you've got on those different social media platforms. So in the days when we used our laptops more than we do in terms of our mobile devices, I would have said, think about it not being word of mouth, but actually it's word of mouse. But we don't tend to use our laptops too much these days. Some research was done by Accenture a few years ago, which said from Ireland's perspective, of all the mature markets, this is the market that relies more in terms of those referrals, word-of-mouth referrals, than any other mature market. You know that. So I just want you to bear that in mind in terms of how do we get that to happen for us in terms of when we go online. Now, I know some people had a bit of a problem going to this site, which is krishna.me/FBC2. But what you'll find there, it just gives me a little opportunity to get a little bit of feedback from those of you here. And if you can't get onto it there, FBC2, so krishna.me/FBC2, one of the things you can go do is go to Slido, slido.com. And what I've done there is I've put a little survey. And you should actually find that it's available now. And there's a little poll there that says, what digital and social platforms are you currently using? And you can put your questions you can put your results into there. And you'll also see there's an area that says questions. So what I'll do, if you do have questions, I actually captured a lot of questions from people the last time. And what I'll do is I'll come back with answers to those, and I'll come back to PIBA to actually give them some responses to the questions that have been asked. There's an area there that you can ask questions. But please feel free to ask me questions on the way through if you've got any questions that you wish to explore. So the voting's open there for you to be able to have a look at. If you do wish to do so. And that is helpful in terms of actually seeing what people are using. That gives me a sense of the platforms that people are using in their business at the point in time. So if you have entered it in, let me just have a look. And I've got 3 people who voted. Let's have a look. I can't see your votes at the minute. I'll come back to that in a little while. Anyway, so if you do have questions and you don't want to ask them out loud, please feel free to ask them there, and I'll come back a little bit later or outside of the session to give back some responses. So let's have a look in terms of social media in an Irish context. Ipsos MRBI, I think we're here presenting this morning. If you follow their work and you follow them on Twitter, it's the one organization who regularly publish content about what's happening in the world of social media in an Irish context. It's not perfect. It's an omnibus survey of 1,000 people about what other platforms we're using. So what you see in front of you now is actually the fact that Facebook being a very popular platform still here. Because many people want to know, well, is my audience on various platforms? Because I want to spend time on social media using the platforms that are actually going to be able to meet them at. Now, at the end of the session, there's going to be a link for you to go to where I've actually got 15 resources that actually you can use around this whole session, and articles and tutorials which will help you out. And so there'll be resources there, and specifically around Facebook as well. But one of the things that you see here is people mentioning about Google+. I do have some questions about Google+ being so high, and I think that's partly inflated because people don't realize Google+ is different to Gmail. So when people maybe say, oh yeah, I use Google, because they're thinking about Gmail, Google+ is Google's own social network. It's not actually, in my experience, used so much. But typically what we find is that Facebook and certainly LinkedIn and also Twitter, as you see there, are popular platforms. Now, what about in terms of from a marketing perspective? So I know some of you might be in a larger organization. Some of you might be in your own small practice. And in that case, this is from the context of marketing and what are marketers saying in terms of their use of social media, and particularly where they're going to invest this year. So this piece of research was done by the Irish Times, Media Solutions, and Mediacom. And what marketers are saying in an Irish context is that Facebook is actually, and Twitter and YouTube and Instagram, that's the icons that are there. But social media is one of the biggest areas that they're looking to invest for this year. So it's going to continue to be competitive in terms of on that space. The next area that they're investing in is search. And search is 2 things. That's by pay-per-click. That's your adverts that you might see, for example, on Google. Maybe you're doing some of that. And the other area is actually SEO, search engine optimization. That's where you do things to make sure that your websites are optimized in search results. So if people go online or you go online and you do a search, and obviously Google isn't the only search engine, but let's take Google for an example, where people type in a phrase, you want your content to be appearing there. So people are optimizing their content for search, one, by using Google Ads, for example. Secondly, might be about optimizing their local business page, getting reviews. Maybe that's one of the things that you want to look at in terms of getting reviews from clients on Google, because that will help you rank there. And the other thing is about actually optimizing your content. So making sure the content on your website matches up to what people are looking to search for. So that's the kind of 2 key areas that they're looking to invest in at this point in time. And this other research was done by Edelman Ireland last year with the Marketing Institute. And this was about what platforms do other marketers find as actually being the most relevant in terms of for their business, most important social media platforms for their business. So if you're using Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, then you're actually along the same lines as actually our colleagues in other sectors. One question I often get asked is, do I need a website? I just had somebody come up to me at the end of the last session who was exactly in that place. They don't have a website at this point in time. If you've got zero money to invest in a website, then there is a resource in that list of resources I'm going to mention at the end. But that's where sometimes people have been using social media to at least have something. You know, when people go online and they're looking for an answer, today you also will find that social media content may actually come up in search results as well. So I was doing some searching when I was just sat at the back of the room. I was here for a couple of hours, and I could see that on some of the searches I was doing, social media content, let's say YouTube videos, were coming up in search results in terms of answers to the questions that I was typing in just on my phone in terms of on search. However, if you don't have a website, and let's say you want to go beyond a one-page site, for me that's a great signal, because a lot of us in Ireland don't have websites for our businesses yet. Whatever we might do in terms of social media and the tools and the tips I'm going to give you a little bit later on around actually social business, we cannot control what's going on in terms of with social media. They will change, those platforms change perhaps several times a week, and we don't have any control over it. Whereas your website, you can manage. You can manage the content that's on there. So let's take, for example, a change that happened a day ago on a platform that some of you might be using, which is Instagram. Instagram actually made a change, which is a good change, about how images and videos will show up. But they didn't inform me as an Instagram user for my business that they were going to make a change. I just heard about it when other people were starting to write about it, when the tech news sites started to announce that was happening. So you will see that those social media platforms continue to change. So I'm not saying don't use social media, but use it as a way to reach your target audience and actually use your website as your hub of content. Now, if there's some of you who are here who were the exhibitors, I know many of you are actually providing content that those of us in the room could use on our website. Maybe it's calculators, ready reckoners, things that actually are really helpful and useful, and other resources. But one of the biggest challenges that I see when I look at social media content on people's sites, and I've been using social sites, in fact, since 2005. So I was actually using social media platforms before Facebook and Twitter actually were available for us to use. I was using other tools at that time. But when I go and have a look at a business, actually, it's no bad thing that you might share content to other people's sites. But I'd love to hear your voice amongst it, about your point of view, your thought leadership. We heard this morning about being a trusted advisor, being somebody that actually could actually be relatable. And people could obviously go and do searches, but actually if they come across content from people that they know and they trust, or people actually start to see appearing quite a number of times, that actually starts to get some traction for them. So as an example, when I shared some content today, I actually linked back to some content back over to Instagram about their announcement. And I did that deliberately from the back of the room to show you that I was doing that just on my phone. So if you went to my Twitter account, you'll see that I actually had done that. So maybe it's a good reason for me to share that in terms of on Twitter, because it shows I'm up to date with the latest changes. However, to take it the next step, maybe one of the things I could do in the next 24 hours is to write a little article or write a little video or create a little video which talks about my perspectives on the change, why this is good or bad from a marketing perspective, and how you might put it to use. Therefore, I'm not just giving you the news, but I'm overlaying a point of view. So my sector is very, very different. My expertise is very different to you. I just wanted to give you that as a little example about how you might look to do that in terms of having that website. So what I want you to start to think about is actually creating your own content, not just directing people back to other people's content. Maybe there's some great resources that you want to share, which is fantastic. But I'd love amongst those links that you're sharing on your social networks to be some of your content. So here's 3 things that you could look to do in terms of identifying content. Some of you may already have a content calendar, which is what really basically it's a plan for what is going on in the course of the year and what might be therefore relevant for you to share. If you know there are new products that are coming out, then you actually might want to plan for that. But you also know there are life things that happen during the course of the year that might be of interest to your audience. And so you could think about planning your content around those themes and what might be relevant there. Over and above that, though, here's some ideas about how you might actually already have content that you could look to share. So my first thing that you might want to write down to do is actually look at what's the top 50 questions that you're asked by clients or prospects. I am guessing that you probably could have maybe 1,000 or more than 1,000 questions that are asked of you. But look, what are the top 50? And how could you turn that into content? That could be content that's an article, it could be content that's a video, that could be content which is an image with some words over the top of it. And the chances are that you've been answering those questions already, both verbally perhaps, or perhaps by email. I reckon if you go back to your emails, you've probably got a whole lot of articles that have already been partly written. And here's where I use that tactic myself. Because every time I create a piece of content and I publish it, particularly on my website, I actually have got content that becomes like a little salesperson. So I'm not selling anything per se, but I'm sharing a point of view and I'm sharing knowledge that will be of help to my target audience. So how could you take, let's say, even just start with 10 of those questions? And actually, how could you turn that into knowledge? Because now that content can work for us 24/7, 365 days a year. And if we're smart about how we title the content and a few other little technical things, which I'm happy to talk to you about separately, when people do that search in terms of on the search engines, there's more of a chance that your content will be identified and seen. So being found in search is not an easy thing, but a good place to start is write about the questions that you know people are asking, they know that they're searching for. And I would guess that you've already got the answers to some of those already. So perhaps don't look to sell a product, but actually write content that actually is educational and helpful to people around when they're searching for answers to that question. Now here's a little bonus tip for you. I didn't give this to the group who were here before, so don't tell them. I actually was looking at some of the websites of people in this room, and including some of the people who actually were speaking this morning on stage. When I looked, and some of them have got blogs on their websites. I don't mind if you call it a blog, if you call it news, if you call it buzz. I'm just delighted that you're doing that. But here's a missed trick that was happening in terms of on those blog posts that I was looking at. Firstly, they weren't actually directing people to do anything. They didn't have any call to action to say, download the free checklist, or contact us in terms of if you want to book a conversation to just explore this further. They didn't link from that one article to other articles and resources they had on their site. That's a missed opportunity. They had no buttons for social sharing. So if people came across content that was really valuable, there wasn't an easy way for people to think about sharing it. And there were no images. Attach an image to that content. I usually put it at the header. I've got a resource for you later if you don't have lots of access to images and you want to do things on a very, very small budget, let's say free. I've got that for you a little bit later on. But I would never publish any content on my site without having an image. And the image doesn't have to be absolute, but it could be illustrative. And therefore, what we do know is actually having an image gets your content shared much more. So think about actually having some calls to action, deep link to other content on your site, and having an image on those articles you share. The next question I've got for you here is, what are the current trends you see in your industry? Maybe there's a particular sector you're working with, maybe there's a particular type of prospect that you want. So actually, how could you share your perspectives around that? That might be an idea for some of your content. And maybe you do a roundup once a month. So I'm not saying publish content every single day, but actually what you might do is like, here's some trends and here's some topics that you might find of assistance and of interest, and it shows to your audience that you actually are on top of actually what's going on. If I know that I'm dealing with somebody in an area where I have no knowledge, I have limited knowledge, which is probably the same with your prospects, Actually, and I know that somebody here is on top of the latest things, but actually can make sure that it's accessible to me and it's not done with any, jargon, I actually begin to trust them, and so therefore I might be more open to talk to them. And then the other thing here is, what's the breaking news in your industry or in your sector? It's not always easy to talk about that. So let's take an example. We've got the storm going on today. I went onto Twitter and I looked at the hashtag. And there's some really inappropriate tweets amongst the hashtag for the storm. And some people trying to sell their business on the back of the storm. I'd say you probably want to be very careful if you're going to talk about natural disasters or human disasters and attach your brand to it, because you've probably seen lots of examples where people got that really horrendously wrong. So be careful about doing that. But it might be there's other things that you could talk about that becomes relevant and you can actually be seen there. And why is it that that would be helpful? Well, let's just take Twitter, for example. If there was only one reason I was going to be on Twitter, it's because that's where the journalists are. Does traditional news still matter? Absolutely. You may have contacts in those newsrooms and to those journalists and those organizations, but the chances are they're also still looking for experts who have a point of view on it. So number one, those journalists are there. And so they actually might see your content come up because of the search or the thing that they're looking at there. And I've had that happen to me, where I've had a direct message on Twitter from a journalist who happens to know my phone number, who happens to know my email address, that just chose to contact me on Twitter, wanting a quote for an article they're writing about because my topic was very topical for what they were writing out for their publication. The other thing, I don't know if you've noticed this, is Twitter Moments. If you're on Twitter on your mobile phone, particularly, it's actually there at the bottom. If you do the search now, it immediately brings up Twitter Moments. Twitter Moments actually is a way that your content gets curated. You could create a curation, let's say, about top tips. If I've been at a conference and there's lots of good tips are shared, I can put together a little, what's called a Twitter moment that stays on my Twitter profile, and it might be my favorite content from that day. It doesn't have to be just always mine, it could be other people's. But the thing I've actually noticed is, particularly around trending topics, Twitter themselves or other people might curate content, which again, if you're doing things within that social media content that you're sharing on Twitter, which might be even directing people back to your site, it's a way that your content can be elevated within that. So a little bit technical for those of you who are on Twitter, but one thing to consider. Let me also give you another thought in terms of having looked at those websites this morning. Here's one of the things I came to somebody's website, and the question there was, the next step was to leave, the big bold thing was to actually call them to take the next step. I don't know about you as a consumer, but if that was the next way that I could interact with somebody, and actually I had to make a phone call, I might be a bit nervous, because that feels like going on a date, and I'm not quite ready to date you. Because if I phone you, my skepticism might be, oh, they're going to have me there, and they're never going to be off the phone to me, and they're always going to be chasing me, and all those negative connotations about being on somebody's phone list. Perhaps an option is available to you that allows people to interact with you without giving you their phone number. Maybe you have a way, and there's lots of tools available, and I've got them on my own site, where people can leave a question, and it can be anonymous. And actually, I can message them back. And if they want to, if I'm online, I can say I'm online to be able to answer the question now. And if I'm not online, they can leave an email address so I can get back to them. But it means they don't have to feel like they have to be on a phone call with me, because they might be concerned about that being the first next step. Or maybe there's a document you can invite them to download, or a PDF, or something else that actually gives them a sense of you and your organization and how to build trust there. If it's actually, you think that it's not about making a phone call. Am I wrong? Or would you also be kind of nervous that the first step is make a phone call? Yeah, some of us also agree. So think about other ways that you might actually look to connect with those people. So how might we create content? Well, I've given you an idea already that you probably have content already crafted. Maybe it needs a little bit of tweaking, that's sitting within your email outbox. or other things that are sitting on your website. Always be careful in terms of copyright. Make sure if you do quote somebody else that you give attribution to the original source. But ideally, if it's your own content, then you obviously don't need to worry about that from a copyright perspective. What you might choose to do now is say, okay, well, how can I turn that around into content that would be fit for my website, for example? In that case, if you don't have the resources to hand or you don't want to do it yourself, you can actually look to outsource it. And so you could ask somebody else to craft that in a way, and therefore they actually can manage it. Maybe some of you are working with webmasters who could do that as well. Perhaps you want to create some content from scratch. Well, here's an idea for you. If the idea of actually sitting down to write 200 or 300 words makes you cold, and maybe you're happy to speak, Google themselves have got transcription tools available where you can speak into your browser and it will transcribe your words. It won't be word perfect, but it will give you a first cut. There's another tool called Dragon Naturally Speaking. Dragon Naturally Speaking, where you train it to your voice. And therefore, you can speak, and it will transcribe for you on your desktop. I know people who've actually authored books. So there's one person I know who's authored several books by speaking the book out onto Dragon. Obviously, now he works with an editor to be able to look at that and proofread it and correct all the spellings and so on. But that's how he's got his first copy or his first draft of his book out. 1 hour of audio translates to about 25 pages of content. How many articles could you create from that? Or how many little ebooks or checklists could you create from getting that knowledge out of your head out into other ways? Now, if you want to take it the ultimate way, you might speak it out. That might become a podcast. You could translate that into a video. It then becomes an ebook or articles. So you can actually do one thing once, but then actually deliver it in different formats that actually might meet different people's needs, because people like to listen and other people like to watch. So there's different ways you can do that. So that's one option. We could do some of that ourselves. We could look to outsource it. But what if this is your office? Perhaps you spend a lot of time traveling. And perhaps you spend time, and the time you have that is spare, it's in the car. Well, that's where this kind of thing works, that I actually create about 80% of my content now on my phone. And my phone isn't even the latest update. Now, of course, you could use Android or iOS devices. This is a photograph of somebody who happens to work for the BBC. But I do quite a lot of work with people in the media in terms of journalism. And I'm very fortunate to have been at a conference, which happens again in a few months' time, where it is happening here in Ireland, and about 700 journalists from all over the world come together to learn about mobile journalism. For me, from a brand perspective, it's mobile brand journalism. RTE do the same. The BBC, CNN, their journalists today, their reporters, are creating content with their mobile phone. Now, at the back of the room, we've got a wonderful camera, we've got a brilliant sound desk, we've got lighting that's going on. That's all been shrunk down. There's a time and a place for having that, but for some organizations now, including media organizations, they're actually doing that where they've got a phone attached to a holder, which has got a little light on top, and they've got a microphone. And that's how they're creating content. And some of that content is going onto TV even, let alone onto their social networks. So maybe that's a way for you to look at it. And again, in my resources, then I've actually got some tools that you can use to get yourself started. So if you happen to look at my Facebook page today, or you looked at my Twitter account, you'll see that actually I posted a little video. Where did I create the video? I created the video when I was sat at the back of this room when this morning session was going on, just to show you that actually it can be done. As long as you've got a data connection or Wi-Fi, you actually can create content anywhere. And you know, that could be done at any time of day or night. So that might not be what you want to focus on, but if for those of us who've got limited budgets, we don't have a budget to be able to go out to designers and creators for content, we actually want to have much more content than we have available to us at the minute, that's the way to do it. Now, one of the things that I've got in my resources for you later on is a tool where you can get images. So one of the things you might do is you could even create video content, and there are low-cost and free tools, apps you can put on your phone, where you can just take images and actually turn those images into video. You can even speak over the top of them if you so wish. If I were in your position, I'd look to try and take my own photographs. So it might be, obviously be careful about actually making sure if there's anybody featured in it, you get their permission. But I would tend to take things that are illustrative. Let's say if you're working on some paperwork, maybe you put your glasses down and your pen and the papers and you take a shot of that. But then that's your photograph. You don't have to go to Google Images, find an image, and then potentially get fined for using content that is not yours. In that list of resources, though, I've also given you a tool that you could actually use publicly available content, and you can use it commercially, and you can download them on desktop or on mobile if you so wish. And so therefore you could create content with that. So you could create content which is maybe an image and put some words over the top of it. So if you look at my Twitter account again later on, I took a photograph of one of the speakers this morning, and I put a quote from them over the top of their photograph. Now, there isn't a hashtag, I don't believe, for the conference. Otherwise, I'd have used the hashtag to also share that. But again, how you could actually share. Now, I was sharing one of his tips. I gave him attribution on it. I mentioned that on the photograph and also in the tweet. I actually was sharing some content from somebody else, just to show you that's what the kind of thing is that you can just do from your phone. So is it time for us all to be able to become a mobile brand journalist? Even the biggest organizations in the country who've got a lot of money where they're spending on TV and other media in terms of content, one of the things I find them saying is that social demands so much content that actually they don't have an unlimited budget, and so even they can't go out to their agencies to create content. So if you're in a bigger organization, you might have some brand guidelines that you give people in terms of do say this, don't say this is the kind of image that would be appropriate, or you don't post it until we've had approval, or it goes through one person to be able to post it. But in the meantime, I'd encourage you to say, how do you take content yourself? Going back to the storm this morning, if you have a look at the ESB Twitter account, you can see obviously they've got people out and about taking photographs, sharing them back to their central team to show people what's going on. If I looked at the fire brigade there, and there were photographs there were the trees down across the road. What they're doing is they're bringing what's going on to life for people in terms of this is what the reality of what we're dealing with. So slightly different because that was a natural disaster today, or natural accidents or issues today that they're dealing with, but they're using images in that particular way to do that. So I know that some of you are using social networks, in particular those top 3 we talked about earlier on. So let's look at actually what's working today in terms of on Facebook. Those of you who are using Facebook, make sure you're using a Facebook page, not your profile, because there's specific requirements for you as a business to be using a page. Profile is where people like you, friend you, whereas your page is where people like you. Few things that are particularly working. They've changed the algorithm again in terms of what content is working. Video content is working really well on Facebook. And in fact, what they announced just about a week or so ago, that actually if people interact with your content, and let's say it's a longer video, maybe it's a 2-minute tip versus a 21-second piece of content, they'll be showing those people who are interested in that longer content more of your longer content. So if people interact with you in that content, they'll be able to do that. The other thing that's interesting that they're doing is that you'll probably have seen it already, that people can minimize your content, your video content, and maybe they've seen that on their news feed organically, or maybe it's an ad that you've placed. It actually will continue to play as people are scrolling and active through Facebook, and it continues to work. And the other thing that they've actually announced that they're doing, which is available for Android users, and Android is a huge platform, as you know, in terms of people using that as a device. Actually, it will play even if people leave Facebook and go off and do something else with another app, your video will continue to play. So if you are not using video on Facebook at the minute, you're missing an opportunity. Please consider video in your content for Facebook. They even have little tools themselves within Facebook where you can upload several photographs and it will turn into a little slideshow as well. So maybe that's another option that you could look to do. Outside of that, then I'd be looking at sharing links. So just a status update doesn't get as much traction. So if you can do, what I would look to do is share a link. So that's where there's a link back from maybe content on your own website. And remember, when you do share that, you can actually change the little description that comes up, and you can change the photograph. So maybe you have got a photograph that's not so good on your website, you can't get around to changing it, but you could actually find something that's more relevant for your Facebook audience. I'd look at that. And then outside of that would be photographs. Now, of course, unless you've got an audience that's really interactive on Facebook, who actually really love, let's say, motivational quotes. You've probably seen those doing their rounds. So it might be you actually put your own quotes. So that image that I created today, I wouldn't use that personally, but the idea of having an image and actually putting a quote from somebody, that could be something, if it's relevant for your content on Facebook, that does get traction. However, one thing to know about Facebook, it has changed so significantly in terms of over the recent years that you really have to advertise. You really have to pay to actually get your content seen. Unless you do something which I'm going to talk about a little later on in our session. So what I might experiment with, if you haven't done so already, is do some Facebook advertising. Now, this is available to you even if you don't have a Facebook page. And one of the things that Facebook offers you is very, very targeted, to be able to connect. So you can be very specific in terms of the demographic, the location, the interest that people have. And if you are on Facebook, you'll get the option to, what they say, boost a post right underneath it, and you can do that. If you've tried that, what I'd suggest you do is investigate in terms of taking it to the next step, because you can do things where you actually can create, for example, what's called custom audiences. So let's say you had an event and you had people's email addresses and they happily gave you those email addresses. You actually could take those email addresses and add them into Facebook advertising, and you could deliver a specific piece of content, a specific ad, just to those people if they were using the same email address that they'd used when they registered for your event as they were using over on Facebook. You could also do things in terms of retargeting. So you could do things where people have come to your website and actually then they've gone elsewhere. You actually can look to have a little bit of code on your site, so you can look to actually serve an advert that's relevant to what they were looking at over on Facebook. So if you haven't tried boosting your content, that's the first place to start. It's going to get you some results, but to get to the next step, I'd say either invest in learning yourself about Facebook advertising. Lots of courses available. I frankly would say don't buy a book, because Facebook keep changing their advertising options so frequently. So I'd either go on a course, you could do that online or in person, or actually look to hire an agency or even a small practice on a social media practice who might be able to do that for you. So advertising is definitely worthwhile you having a look at. And so there are a couple of things in terms of going to help you with Facebook today. Let's look to Twitter. Again, I would rarely send any content on Twitter without there being an image or a video there. One suggestion I have for you, if you haven't used the ads platform on Twitter, yes, you could pay for ads on Twitter, but here's a feature I use of ads, which I don't pay for. If you go to ads.twitter.com and then log in with your Twitter account there for your business, there's an area where it says create media right at the top. And you can't do this on mobile, you have to do it on desktop. I can load up my photographs there, I can load up my videos there. And just as with Facebook, where you can schedule content, which you probably are doing already, you can schedule content directly on Facebook, you can do that now on Twitter. So I could upload a video onto Twitter. I can actually have a call to action button. So maybe I want people to come and read an article next. When people play that video, they can click the video and they can come back over to my website. So I actually can drive people from that video over to my website. I can also upload images there if I wish to. But on my video, I also get a couple of other lines of content. So it makes my tweet even more expanded rather than be limited to that 140 characters that I've got. So that's something I would consider doing in terms of using that, and then I can reschedule. So if you're limited for time, you might say, okay, once a week I'm going to schedule content. Obviously, be careful in terms of if you schedule something, then something happens which is a disaster, and therefore it will be seen as inappropriate content. You might want to go back and actually put your content on pause, but you can actually do that all directly within Twitter as well. And the other one is on LinkedIn. So many of you are using LinkedIn. It's about to change if you haven't had the change already. I don't, but it's about to make some changes, particularly in terms of one of note is the fact that we won't be able to search so much if you've been using a free account. And so what you might want to look at in your organization, if LinkedIn is important to you in terms of finding prospects, you might want to investigate their paid-for tools, particularly in terms of Sales Navigator, which is a social selling tool, but it is a paid-for tool, which is going to give you some of the features that we're going to lose with this new update on LinkedIn. However, for those of you who don't have a website yet, this might be a great place to start in terms of publishing content. Or those of you who've got a website where you can't easily update it, because on LinkedIn, you can actually publish articles and content. So on LinkedIn, you could actually go and you can upload a photograph, you can put in your content there, you could link back to anything else you wish to do so, you can share it to your LinkedIn network, you can share it to other social networks. So it's a great way to start getting practice in terms of writing short-form content, if you wish to do so, and you actually have that available to you free to use. Do not forget YouTube. YouTube, as I mentioned earlier on, will pop up in search results. So back to those 50 questions, which of those questions could you turn into videos? And again, I would use the search engine within YouTube to help me identify good phrases and titles, and I'd title my content in that way, and I would upload directly to YouTube. I upload videos directly to Facebook. I wouldn't share from YouTube to Facebook because it doesn't play as nicely over on Facebook. So I'd take that same video and I'd upload it to Twitter, I'd upload it to Facebook, and I'd upload it to YouTube. And if I want to think about LinkedIn, then I actually would share it over on LinkedIn because they don't give me the ability to actually publish video content at this point in time. So I definitely would consider YouTube. But here's the thing that's actually been beating other things on social network, and that's live video. And so in terms of live video, particularly Facebook Live and Twitter Live, they've been getting a lot of traction and coverage, and that is the thing that I would be thinking about. So this is even better than actually publishing just video because you do it in real time. You could invite people to meet you at a particular location. Maybe you're doing it on Facebook, maybe you're going to do it on Twitter, and actually they can ask you questions in real time. So you might decide like once a month, or I do one once a week, where every single week on a particular day, at a particular time, I do a live video show where I'm answering questions and I'm covering the latest stories on my particular topic, which happens to be live video. And that's just an example of one of my friends, Roger, who happens to be just out with his phone, with something to hold his phone, and actually doing some live video there from when he's out and about. And the final thing I just want to mention in terms of things to be looking out for is bots. How can we do things actually that save us time? This week I got an email newsletter from a restaurant, and it happens to be a pizza restaurant. I'm on their newsletter list. And they've now said, on Facebook, you can now book a table in our restaurant within seconds. And they've got it all automated with bots. You might have seen organizations starting to look at that. Maybe there's some tools that you could look at. So maybe it's that chatbot that might be on your website that actually allows people to book a meeting or schedule content, and you don't have to be there in terms of you being present. So if you're really at the advanced stage in terms of your digital marketing, I definitely would be looking at chatbots. There was a really interesting example I looked at a little while ago, which was somebody who was looking to sell their house. And they created a chatbot which actually basically served up all this information in terms of they were selling their grandmother's house. And actually, it was always done automatically. It happened to be using Facebook as the platform there. So just as we round off, if you do have further questions, you can easily find me online. You can message me there. Or, of course, you can go over to my website. There's a particular link here that you might want to take a note of, because on that page are 15 resources, the best resources I can give you at this point in time to keep up to date with the latest changes and trends, how you might use Twitter for customer support, latest trends in terms of on video and also on live video, and also tools and resources for those of you who haven't got websites in place or email marketing set up in place. Thank you so much for being with me here today. I hope you have a good rest of the day. But if you do have any questions, I'll be here before the next session. But thank you so much for being here. And I wish you every success in 2017 in terms of your social sales.